I'm just gonna skip all of the 2020 was weird talk and dive right into my main point here. This was a great year for games. We witnessed a lot of titles that celebrated the best of what our medium can do, and if there's any upside to spending all of your time inside, it's the chance to sample the best and brightest in gaming. So I figured I'd compile a quick list of 10, feeding off that good Watch Mojo format, and share my thoughts on what I consider to be 2020's best games. Let's get started. As games have evolved over the generations, certain genres have faded into the background, primarily due to their lack of spectacle. The classic 2D beat-em-up is one of the pioneers of our industry, with Streets of Rage, Final Fight, Double Dragon, and many more being some of the first and best in class. So when Streets of Rage 4 came out, and provided what can only be described as a pure return to form, it was surprising to see that this game, which honestly doesn't do all that much to differentiate itself from its predecessors, still manages to leverage its simplicity to create something dynamic and fundamentally interesting. The story, even in this modern design space, feels very classic in its execution, the art direction is detailed and very satisfying, and the game doesn't hesitate to pay homage to its retro roots with certain artistic Easter eggs. The combat is fun and engaging, and the online multiplayer helps to bring it forward into a new era from its couch co-op roots. A very nice reminder of how effective simpler games could be. I love Mega Man. Always have. I love Mega Man X, I love Mega Man Battle Network, I love Mega Man Star Force. And I was fortunate enough to have played through most all of these games when I was younger. Mega Man Zero and ZX are something different in their entirety. Mega Man Zero is a leap in difficulty, not for the faint of heart, and ZX transitions the series into a more Metroidvania style. And so when I found out that these games were being compiled for re-release in Capcom's Mega Man Zero/ZX Legacy Collection, my heart sang. These titles demand a level of action platforming precision that I couldn't dream of achieving, even after beefing it up with Celeste for the better part of February. Every game in this collection is not created equal, and I'd be lying to say otherwise, but there's some consistency throughout as fascinating futuristic sci-fi stories converge to tell a sprawling narrative over 6 titles, with a heightened sense of stakes and consequences seldom seen in a platforming series, including previous Mega Man titles. These games are a natural evolution of the incredibly diverse gameplay styles we've seen in the Mega Man X series. Yet, they still have an incredibly prominent identity of their own, rooted in fast-paced action, incredibly challenging boss fights, strategic depth in the way that you outfit your player character, and much more. Once upon a time, it was at meme level how Capcom seemed to disrespect Mega Man, and yet this compilation is quite respectful in its execution, bringing collectible memorabilia and a brand new Versus mode to challenge self-identified speedrunners. Well, it's already been quite some time since these games made their debut on Nintendo's original handheld family. They still serve as examples of some of the best this genre has to offer. I'll admit I might catch heat for this game being as low as it is on the list, but consider that this was a big year full of genuinely great games by a lot of different studios. Ikenfell will always have my love for being a very inventive game in its approach to its combat and storytelling. Its use of small numbers reminds me of that simplicity that made the first Paper Mario such a blast to play. Its emphasis on movement in combat helps turns feel more involved and interactive than they might in a game like Pokemon. Plus, it's very aesthetically pleasing, drawing on its setting to create lively and diverse environments with creative enemies and a fitting soundtrack. I am a huge fan of Ivy and Sarashi and Adriana Figueroa, so it was nice to see those names and hear their signatures and their respective contributions to the game's overall sound. Now, I should be clear that there were definitely some other musical contributions from various artists included in this game. Ivy and Sarashi were the primary composers, and Adriana Figueroa is the first name that I recognize from some of her previous musical work. I won't be able to credit everyone who worked on the game's soundtrack, obviously, but overall, the package that the soundtrack turns out to be is exceptional, and everyone involved deserves their credit for so much of this game's overall quality. Also, I know people get mad whenever you mention this subject, but genuinely, I do enjoy games that handle representation well, and I think Ikenfell is an excellent example of that. I realize that not everything in the game is specifically for me, but I'm glad that people who can relate more directly to some of these characters got to see themselves in a meaningful story like this. That said, on the subject of story, Ikenfeld's narrative is one of the key reasons it's lower on the list for me. Make no mistake, I loved the story. Overall, I think it was an excellent package and that it has a lot to offer a lot of different people. But I also felt that certain important details of the story tend to feel a little bit contrived at certain moments, and that the game does struggle to pin down a consistent tone. Even in spite of these things, Ikenfell is still one of the better games that I've played this year, and it was filled to the brim with some incredibly charming and well-written characters. This is a game worth anyone's time. I've already reviewed this game, so I know many of you probably have a sense of how I feel about it already. I believe Paper Mario, above all else, has to be a fun adventure, and one that allows Mario to play the hero for more than just his princess. Paper Mario: The Origami King gave me everything I wanted and more, and did so in a very beautiful package. If this were a list about graphics and visual style alone, I'm fairly certain this game would be my number one pick. It's a little bit lower on the list because the combat, while inventive, was not very good. Ironically, Ikenfell did a better job at Paper Mario-esque combat than Paper Mario did, encouraging players to make the best possible use of all of their resources and positioning, rather than simply solving puzzles and one-shotting all of your foes. Combat aside, the soundtrack in this game is perhaps the best in the series, and certainly one of the best new game soundtracks this year. If you like Paper Mario, I think this is a game that's necessary to add to your collection. It's certainly not of the same quality as the first or second title, but it is a worthy successor in most ways, perhaps barring combat. If you want to know more of my specific feelings of The Origami King, feel free to check out my review. I'll have it linked at the end of this video. This next entry is a great example of what fortuitous launch timing looks like. Fall Guys: The Ultimate Knockout is a competitive platformer party game structured like a reality TV show. I almost want to say that exact sentence again, because it still genuinely surprises me that a game like this was made in the first place, and somehow seems to appeal to almost all of my specific interests. The competition, the social aspect, the amount of content it generated for Twitch and YouTube for some of my favorite content creators, it all came together so nicely, and I myself have had an absolute blast playing the game, to the point where I still get in a good game of Fall Guys every couple of weeks just about. The wonderfully whimsical art direction and soundtrack help to invite you into a world of weird, wonky physics and hilarious obstacles. Fall Guys is far from perfect, sure. I mean, team minigames are quite a drag, and some of the obstacle courses can feel repetitive if you play for long periods of time. But to have it come from such a small team, this game is very ambitious in a way that I can't help but respect. I'm very happy to see overall how Fall Guys has done, and I can't wait to see what their future seasons will look like. Oh boy. So this is where my list starts to get a little bit on the tricky side. The entire top 5 is worthy of Game of the Year status in my opinion, and trying to order them was definitely a difficult task. But Hyrule Warriors: Age of Calamity is my number 5 pick, and with good reason. When Nintendo announced a sequel to Hyrule Warriors, I, as a longtime Musou fan, was already very excited. But when it was confirmed to be a prequel to Breath of the Wild, telling the official story of how the Calamity spread in the first place, I knew that I was in for the time of my life. And the game delivered on almost every front. The combat was vastly superior to the first Hyrule Warriors. I myself have always loved Musou combat, but this one in particular has an additional layer of strategic depth seldom seen within the franchise. From its use of different runes and elemental weaknesses to the way that different characters require different skill levels and technical mastery, you'll find yourself questioning whether or not you're even playing a traditional Musou game. And that's not even taking into consideration the fact that this game looks just like Breath of the Wild. The visual flourish at play here is so well suited to Musou combat, it's a wonder this hasn't been done already. Although, when you take a look underneath the hood, you kind of find out why that is, because this game does take a severe hit in the front of optimization. With frame dips being relatively commonplace, and lag overall being consistent throughout your experience, it tends to be a little bit difficult to ignore some of the technical challenges associated with the game. And that's before you even get into the conversation about the incredibly long wait times and loading screens. That said, in addition to a massive main story, this game is loaded with content, including tons of side quests, all stylized in the same way as the ones featured in Breath of the Wild, but they still add that Warriors/Muso flair to them. There are challenge battles, survival missions, and all sorts of additional ways to outfit and strengthen the incredibly varied cast of characters. The narrative itself is a blast, despite some story beats that I'm not totally fond of, but to even have criticisms like that in the first place is only possible because this game has a fully voice-acted set of cutscenes with fleshed-out characters and a consistent, detailed narrative, which is something that is unheard of in the Zelda franchise. I'm happy to see this series continuing to take risks even outside of its mainline games. Yet another game that I've done a full video for, but not one that I'm done talking about by any stretch. Spider-Man Miles Morales is one of the few games I've played where I absolutely could not stop once I started. I'm talking a full start-to-finish playthrough over the span of about a day and a half. That said, the game is on the shorter side, so it kind of makes sense that I was able to go through it so quickly. Spider-Man Miles Morales is a short and sweet gem that builds on the best parts of the first game while also having an identity entirely its own. Also, let's call it like it is. I wasn't really looking to be surprised by a sequel to Spider-Man. I didn't need an entire array of new mechanics. I was honestly just looking for more of the same, and it was nice to get that with another charming protagonist. Miles' contrast to Peter's more seasoned approach to being the wall crawler in the first game is a welcome change. I also think that its borderline origin story nature is better suited to Miles, a character that the pop culture zeitgeist is overall less familiar with, and parallels the more interesting Spider-Man movies as well. There's a decent amount to be found in the game also, from a new, varied approach to the crime missions from the original title, to a set of side quests managed in Spidey's own mobile app, to all sorts of personal character details hidden throughout the game. It's again a much shorter experience than its predecessor, but in my eyes, a great glimpse into Insomniac's future with this series. All in all, if you want to feel like a superhero, this is the game to beat. How funny is it that in a year where almost every day felt exactly the same, a game all about repeating the same escape attempts became among the most critically acclaimed? Even still, the Groundhog Day-esque narrative-driven roguelite Hades took the world by storm, proving yet again that if you want something done right, you should probably ask Supergiant Games to do it. I am a believer that the best games are the ones that take something existing, maybe even something prominent, and make it feel fresh and new. Hades does this by taking the punishing sorrow out of a genre known for laying on the hurt. Now, that isn't to say that the game isn't difficult, because Hades packs a punch, consistently, but the way it wears its difficulty suits it well, focusing on incremental growth and improvement, urging you to make decisive choices about how you'll approach a given attempt, and by giving you an eclectic cast of characters to visit each and every time you die. Yet again, indie devs prove that they're not done with the genres that the AAA world has seemingly left behind. Hades does for roguelite games what Celeste did for 2D platformers, showing us that powerful stories and innovative gameplay can be found anywhere, so long as we look hard enough. I was impressed by Persona 5. Truly, I had a very positive experience with the original game and its story and its characters, but Royal felt like something different entirely. It quickly tore through my personal ranks and has become in hindsight one of my favorite games of all time. If you're not sick of my Persona praise after 40 minutes of it a few weeks back, congrats, you're a real one. But I don't think I have much more to say about this game. Royal adds new characters, some of the best written in the game, it adds new story content, new music, new gameplay elements, and a lot of the quality of life changes that improve on an already incredible base game. I know re-releases aren't the most popular thing in the world, with reason, and I understand that the argument that, a full $60 on this one is a lot, but if you loved Persona 5 or haven't played it in full, Royal is undoubtedly the way to go. You'll find yourself adventuring over hours in the triple digits, making friends, working a job, and navigating dungeons to change the hearts of evil adults. The game is charming, taking on a gentleman thief aesthetic for the majority of its dungeon crawling segments, and a nice, stylish, urban contemporary approach for its navigation of the world at large. It is not an understatement to describe this game as truly one of the best RPGs I've ever played, and it was very close to taking my number one spot on this list. But there is just one last game I have to talk about, and it simply couldn't be ignored. Could it have really been anything else? Xenoblade Chronicles was a game that transcended boundaries 10 years ago, with its incredible story and massive worlds. Its art direction spoke for itself, in large part because the Wii's hardware couldn't exactly speak for it. But now, seeing it on a platform like the Switch, experiencing it in a way that I can only describe as originally intended, I'm reminded of why this game became my favorite ever made. To put it simply, Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition is truly the epitome of what adventure should be. The plot is gripping and pulls you along every step of the way. The massive, sprawling world that the game takes place in is full of diverse regions, all of which feel very near and dear to you as you progress throughout the game. From Satoral Marsh to Aerith Sea, Colony 9, Machna Forest, you'll find yourself clinging to the unshakable livelihood of this masterfully crafted world. The Switch version ages up the game considerably, inviting quality of life changes, enhancements to the UI and overall presentation, and a much needed graphical update to put this game in line with its sequels in terms of visual quality. Unfortunately, the Futures Connected epilogue is, in my opinion, kind of dismissible, which feels bad to say, certainly, but it isn't very captivating from a narrative angle, and mechanically it doesn't really introduce anything new, and actually removes some of the depth from the main game's combat in favor of something a little bit more streamlined. Either way, the story of the main game, its cast of characters, massive environments, exceptionally creative and deep combat, and beautifully remastered soundtrack are more than enough to turn this 2010 classic into a modern masterpiece. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition is my #1 game of 2020, but it certainly replaces its original release as my favorite game of all time. In truth, the only list that really matters is the one in your mind and in your heart, but I'm grateful for all of you taking the time to hear my top 10 for this year. I know that some heavy hitters are missing, but I haven't really played Final Fantasy VII Remake or Ghost of Tsushima yet, so I had to omit them because I didn't want to be disingenuous. To have so many contenders in a year when my favorite game of all time got remade says quite a lot. I already have a good feeling about the games that we'll be seeing this coming year, but man, 2020 really knocked it out of the park in this way and this way alone. What were some of your favorite games from last year? Let me know in the comments below and subscribe for more commentary and video essays and reviews. Thank you all as always for joining me, and come back soon for more from The Game Room.